Imagine waking up tomorrow and realizing that the last 50 years of your financial life, your retirement accounts, the global economy, all the stability of the institutions you rely on were determined entirely by just 10 random days.
Right, just 10.
Yes, not a slow, steady climb, just 10 chaotic, massive leaps. And worse than that, imagine that the sophisticated mathematical models supposedly protecting your life savings completely ignore those 10 days.
Because according to their equations, those days are mathematically impossible.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Impossible. Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, let's unpack this.
It really is a terrifying premise
Okay.
when you actually, stop to consider the implications of it. We are talking about the very foundations of how our entire society measures and manages risk.
Right. So today, our mission is to dive into this deeply critical, highly controversial text. It basically argues that the world's smartest academics and financial institutions are relying on this systemic, really dangerous illusion.
Yeah, we're looking at a chapter titled Locke's Madmen, or Bell Curves in the Wrong Places.
Which is such a great title.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it's this relentless, statistically backed takedown of modern economic theory.
And, just to be clear right up front, we aren't here to endorse these fiery views or, take sides politically or financially. We are just acting as your guides to map out this specific argument.
Right, because if this framework is even partially correct, the way you understand risk or business or global crises, it needs an immediate, pretty radical overhaul.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to start with a physical image the text uses, which I just found fascinating. It describes a house with two very different studies.
Yes, the physical separation of knowledge. What's fascinating here is how it perfectly sets up the core conflict. The text outlines this scenario where there's one quote-unquote real study, right? And it's filled with literature, philosophy, books that capture the messy, unpredictable reality of the human condition.
Right, all the humanities stuff.
Exactly. But then down the hall, there's a second non-literary study.
Yeah.
And this room is just packed from floor to ceiling with books on statistics, quantitative finance, probability theory.
And the really aggressive perspective presented in the text is that the second room, the one full of math books, is basically a room full of trash.
Yeah, literally garbage.
The argument is that these traditional statistics books are fundamentally useless for understanding the real world, which, it begs the question why such intense hostility toward an entire field of mathematics.
Well, it comes down to a critical distinction between two completely different environments. The text categorizes these as Mediocristan and Extremistan.
Okay, those are great terms.
They are. And the core argument is that all those statistics books were written for Mediocristan, but we actually live in Extremistan.
Okay, let's break down those mechanisms for the listener, because this is really the bedrock of the whole critique. What exactly is the physics of Mediocristan?
So Mediocristan is the realm of the independent, the average, and the predictable. It's where the classic bell curve, the Gaussian distribution actually works perfectly.
Okay, give me an example of that.
Let's use human height.
Yeah.
If you gather 1,000 random people in a stadium, you will find an average height, maybe around, 5'9".
Right.
You might have a few very short people, and you might have an NBA player who is 7 feet tall. But their heights are independent of each other. My height doesn't physically impact your height.
Right. There is a physical ceiling to it. Even if you bring the tallest human in recorded history into that stadium, they aren't going to be, 2 miles tall. They won't fundamentally distort the average of the whole group in some catastrophic way. The boundaries are fixed.
Exactly. That's Mediocristan. But then we move to Extremistan. And Extremistan is a realm where variables are not independent. They're highly scalable, and they are contagious.
Contagious is a scary word in economics.
It is. Because this is the realm of wealth distribution or book sales or stock market crashes. If you take that same stadium of 1,000 people and look at their wealth, you have an average.
Sure.
But then if a billionaire like Elon Musk walks into the stadium, the average wealth of that room suddenly skyrockets.
Right. Completely blows out the curve.
Exactly. A single extreme data point completely overrides the entire collective.
And applying the math of one to the other is where the danger really lies. The text uses this analogy of developing a medicine for plants and then applying it to humans.
Which on a basic biological level sounds like it might do something, but structurally it's absurd.
It is. But thinking about the mechanism of how this fails, I'd actually propose a different way to visualize it. I was thinking about this when reading.
Let's hear it.
I think applying Gaussian bell curve math to the stock market it's like trying to calculate the danger of an avalanche by meticulously measuring the average size of a single snowflake.
Oh, wow. That actually captures the structural flaw perfectly.
Right. Because you can have the most precise instruments in the world. You can measure a million snowflakes and plot them on a beautiful, perfect bell curve.
But the danger of an avalanche isn't found in the average size of the snowflake.
Exactly. The danger is in how the snowflakes interact when the entire system violently shifts. Gaussian math assumes the snowflakes are independent.
Right, the Mediocristan view.
But Extremistan understands that one slipping snowflake can trigger a catastrophic chain reaction.
And this isn't just, some philosophical debate happening in a vacuum. The text actually frames this as a massive global educational epidemic.
An epidemic? How so?
Because right now, today, hundreds of thousands of students in business schools, social science departments, financial engineering programs globally, they are being rigorously trained to measure snowflakes.
To use Gaussian models.
Yes, they're being taught to use Gaussian models to manage scalable, contagious risks.
So they are basically embedding what the text calls the ludic fallacy into the next generation of leaders.
Yes, the ludic fallacy. That is a crucial concept here.
Let's define that.
It's the misuse of games to model real-life situations. So if you were playing roulette in a casino, the odds are mathematically closed.
Right, there are only so many outcomes.
Exactly. You know there are 38 pockets on the wheel. The absolute worst thing that can happen is you lose your bet. The rules are known.
But real life doesn't have 38 neatly defined pockets.
No. The boundaries are invisible, and the most devastating events are the ones you can't even conceive of, let alone assign a clean probability to.
Okay, I have to challenge this premise just a bit, though. Let's play devil's advocate.
Sure.
Let's say I accept that the real world is Extremistan, and these models are flawed. But isn't a flawed model better than no model at all?
That's the classic defense.
I mean, if I'm running a multinational corporation or managing a billion-dollar pension fund, I can't just throw my hands up and tell my board of directors, hey, it's Extremistan, nobody knows what will happen, let's just guess. I need a baseline metric to operate right.
And that is exactly the defense that the financial establishment uses.
Yeah.
It brings us to a psychological trap called domain dependence.
Okay, domain dependent.
But before we look at the psychology of it, we really have to look at the staggering data the text uses to dismantle that exact defense you just made.
Oh, the data is wild.
The argument is that a flawed model isn't just, quote-unquote, less than perfect. It is actively blinding you to the only data that actually matters.
This brings us back to that hook about the 10 days from the intro. Let's dig into that data because it completely broke my understanding of how markets work.
Yeah, it's a huge paradigm shift.
The text references a specific analysis, figure 14, looking at the United States stock market over a 50-year timeline.
Right, and 50 years represents roughly 12,500 trading days.
Okay.
Now, the conventional wisdom, the baseline metric you just mentioned, needing it, assumes that market returns are generated by a steady compounding process.
Like a little bit up, a little bit down, just smoothing out over time.
Exactly. But the text states that over that half-century, the 10 most extreme days in the financial markets represent half of the total returns.
Half. 10 days out of over 12,000. I mean, if you simply remove those 10 specific days from your 50-year timeline, the entire picture of market returns changes drastically. That steady, predictable climb just vanishes.
And how do the standard Gaussian models handle those 10 days? The framework argues that conventional finance treats those massive systemic leaps as mere anomalies.
Which is just so convenient.
Very. They are viewed as irritating outliers that ruin the clean lines of the bell curve. So the models essentially smooth them over or just dismiss them entirely as aberrations.
Which is total madness. If 10 days represent 50% of the outcome, they aren't anomalies. They are the defining characteristic of the entire system.
Precisely. And the text mentions running backward and forward statistics on 20 million pieces of data, demonstrating conclusively that markets do not fit the Gaussian mold.
20 million data points. You can't argue with that.
You'd think so. And yet, this is where that psychological vulnerability, domain dependence, kicks in.
Okay, explain how that actually works in practice, like in a real office.
Well, the text observes that you can take highly intelligent business professionals, show them this 20 million data point proof at a conference, and they will agree with you.
Yeah, they don't fight it.
Mostly, no. They see the 10 days, they recognize the math is broken, they nod their heads in agreement. But the very next morning, they return to their offices boot up their computers, and immediately open up the exact same Gaussian risk management spreadsheets they just admitted were useless.
That level of cognitive dissonance is wild. It's like admitting the bridge you drive on is structurally unsound, but then driving your family across it every day anyway because, well, it's the quickest route to work. Why do we compartmentalize like that?
Because human beings have a desperate biological craving to simplify uncertainty. Facing true, unquantifiable randomness is genuinely terrifying.
It induces anxiety.
Exactly. These flawed models, even though they are broken, they spit out a clean, precise number, a single metric. So the professionals tell themselves exactly what you asked earlier. A flawed number is better than nothing.
It serves as a psychological security blanket.
Yes, it relieves the tension of the unknown.
Think about how often you, the listener, might do this in your own life. You know the weather app on your phone is notoriously terrible at predicting rain more than maybe 3 or 4 days out.
Right, it's basically guessing at that point.
Exactly. Yet you will still check the forecast for a date 4 weeks in the future to plan an outdoor wedding. And you will base your catering deposits on that little sun or rain icon.
Because your brain desperately craves a concrete plan to anchor onto.
Even if you logically know the data is essentially a wild guess.
But the core warning of this text is that in global finance, preferring the comfort of a broken compass over the anxiety of being lost, it eventually leads you right off a cliff.
And historically, we didn't just walk off a cliff, we practically ran off it. The text points to the stock market crash of 1987 as the exact moment the mathematical impossibility of these models was exposed for the whole world to see.
Oh, 1987. To understand the sheer absurdity of the 87 crash through the lens of traditional economics, we really have to explain how Gaussian models measure risk.
Okay, let's do that.
They use something called standard deviations, which are often referred to as sigmas.
Okay, let's break that down for the audience. What actually is a standard deviation?
A standard deviation is a measure of how spread out numbers are from the average. So in a perfect bell curve, almost all the action happens right in the middle, near the average.
Makes sense.
If you move one standard deviation away from the average, so 1 sigma, you capture about 68% of all possibilities. Move 2 sigmas out, and you capture 95%.
Okay.
Move 3 sigmas out, and you are capturing 99.7% of all expected events.
So a 3 sigma event is rare. It's the very, very thin tail end of the bell curve.
Yes. A 4 sigma event is incredibly rare, so rare you might only see it once in a generation.
So how did the Gaussian models being used by Wall Street classify the severity of the 1987 crash?
Under their equations, the 1987 crash was calculated to be a greater than 20 standard deviation event.
A 20 sigma event.
Yes.
I want to pause on that because I think the human brain struggles with numbers of that scale. What does a 20 standard deviation event actually mean in terms of physical time?
Well, mathematically, if the stock market actually operated on a Gaussian bell curve, a 20 sigma event should only occur once every several billion lifetimes of the universe.
Wait, not several billion years.
No, several billion lifetimes of the entire universe.
That is insane.
It is. The probability is so infinitesimally small that it requires a number with dozens of zeros to even express it.
And yet this event happened on a random Monday in October 1987, during our current single lifetime of the universe.
Exactly.
That is the ultimate proof that the map does not match the territory. I mean, if your model says an event is virtually impossible, and then that event happens right in front of you, the event isn't an anomaly.
Your model is fundamentally fatally broken.
Right. It proves that financial markets are highly contagious Extremistan environments, not independent Mediocristan environments.
And here is the truly frustrating part, according to the text. This wasn't a sudden, shocking revelation in 1987.
No.
No, the academic establishment had been warned about this decades earlier. The text brings up the work of Benoit Mandelbrot.
Yes, the mathematician. The text treats Mandelbrot almost like a prophet who was ignored. What did he figure out?
Back around 1960, so almost 30 years before the 87 crash, Mandelbrot showed the economics establishment that price changes in financial markets did not follow a bell curve.
He had the data.
He demonstrated that they were scalable, contagious, and prone to extreme jumps. He essentially mapped out the mathematics of Extremistan long before the mainstream paid any attention.
There is a quote included in the text from a prominent economist of that era, Paul Kuttner. After reviewing Mandelbrot's findings, Kuttner wrote that if Mandelbrot was right, quote, almost all our statistical tools are obsolete.
And the text offers a sharp, uncompromising correction to Kuttner's assessment.
Oh yeah, I love this part.
The argument is that you should replace almost all with all.
All of them.
Every single financial tool built on a Gaussian foundation is worse than useless in Extremistan. It is an active hazard.
But wait, if Kuttner and other academics saw the math in 1960, and then the crash proved it in 1987, why didn't the field pivot? I mean, in physics, if a new discovery proves an old theory wrong, the physicists adapt, right?
They do.
Why did economists refuse to discard the broken tools?
Because of the massive institutional sunk cost.
Sunk cost.
Think about it. If the establishment accepted Mandelbrot's reality, they would have to admit that all their prestigious knowledge, all their published papers, all their complex models were effectively void.
Wow, their entire careers.
Exactly. They would have to completely relearn their trade from scratch. So they made a collective decision to demand a central measurement tool to anchor on, regardless of its accuracy.
They told themselves, we have nothing else, and just willfully ignored the reality of the fat tails.
That is institutional cowardice.
They chose the prestige of a complex, broken equation over the messy reality of admitting they didn't know how to predict the future. And rather than punishing this failure, the system actually rewarded it.
Oh, it heavily rewarded it.
Which leads us to the text's blistering, scorched earth critique of the Nobel Prize in economics.
This section is particularly aggressive. What's fascinating here is how the text makes a crucial distinction right away. What we call the Nobel Prize in economics is not actually one of the original prizes established by Alfred Nobel.
That blew my mind. I think most people assume it's right up there with physics, chemistry, and peace.
It isn't. It was established much later, in 1968, by the Bank of Sweden.
The Bank of Sweden?
Yes, ostensibly in memory of Alfred Nobel. But the text highlights that Nobel's own family has publicly expressed disgust at the prize and actually wants it abolished.
Wait, really? The Nobel family hates it?
Yes. The narrative quotes an activist family member who bluntly calls the economics prize a public relations coup by economists aiming to put their field on a higher footing than it deserves.
Wow. So the implication is that economists desperately wanted the hard science prestige of, like, physics? So they effectively created a prize to legitimize their social science.
That's the claim. And the text suggests Alfred Nobel is likely rolling in his grave over it.
Now, while the author of the text concedes that the prize has occasionally gone to truly valuable thinkers, like they mention the psychologist Daniel Kahneman, who studied human irrationality.
Brilliant work, yes.
They argue the committee has developed a dangerous pattern. They routinely award the prize to theoreticians who bring what looks like mathematical rigor to economics, but which the text dismisses as entirely phony mathematics.
And the specific targets of this critique are Harry Markowitz and William Sharpe.
Right.
They were awarded the prize in the early 1990s, and notably, this was after the 1987 crash had already blown up the Gaussian models. They won for something called modern portfolio theory.
Okay, modern portfolio theory. Break that down.
From the text perspective, Markowitz and Sharpe built incredibly beautiful, elegant, Platonic models of how investments should be managed.
Platonic meaning like perfect in theory, but not existing in reality.
Exactly.
Sure.
The fatal flaw is that these models were entirely built on that same discredited Gaussian bell curve base. The argument is clear. If you remove those unrealistic Gaussian assumptions and treat market prices as the scalable Extremistan entities they actually are, the entirety of modern portfolio theory collapses into hot air.
The text literally compares their Nobel-winning models to quack remedies sold on the internet.
It doesn't hold back.
No, it points out that nobody in Stockholm seemingly bothered to ask the actual practitioners, the traders who survived the 87 crash in the trenches, whether these theories worked in reality.
Right. They relied on an insular academic vetting process that the text describes as corrupt to the marrow.
But the real tragedy is the real-world impact of that award.
Right.
Once the Bank of Sweden stamped modern portfolio theory with the Nobel brand, it gave it unassailable credence.
Oh, absolute credence. Software vendors swooped in immediately.
Software vendor.
Yeah. They started selling these Nobel-crowned risk management methods to financial institutions, pension funds, and corporations for millions of dollars.
Wait, I have to stop you there. If the practitioners on the ground knew it didn't work, if the traders surviving the crashes knew the bell curve was a joke, How on earth did these software programs become the unquestioned industry standard?
Because it became the ultimate institutional cover-your-behind strategy.
Explain that dynamic. How does that work?
Well, imagine you are managing a massive state pension fund. You are responsible for billions of dollars of firefighters and teachers' retirements.
High stakes.
Very high stakes. If you use your own judgment and lose billions of dollars, you will be fired, sued, and publicly disgraced.
Right, obviously.
But if you buy a multi-million-dollar software package based on Nobel-winning theories, and then you lose billions of dollars when the market crashes,
You don't get fired.
you don't get fired.
Ah, because you can throw your hands up and say, hey, don't look at me. I followed the undisputed Nobel-approved scientific method. No one could have seen this coming.
Exactly. The flawed math provides institutional cover for catastrophic failure. The text explicitly answers your question with what might be the thesis statement of the entire critique.
What's the quote?
It is contagion that determines the fate of a theory in social science, not its validity.
Contagion. It behaves exactly like a virus. It doesn't matter if the theory actually works. It only matters how effectively it spreads and how deeply it embeds itself into the host's defense mechanisms.
And for a contagion to spread globally, it requires a highly efficient vector.
Which, in this case?
In this case, the text argues the vectors were the business schools.
This brings us to what the text describes as the MBA epidemic. It details how Gaussian-trained finance professors quietly took over the curriculums of MBA programs across the world.
It was a quiet revolution.
In the United States alone, they were churning out close to 100,000 students a year.
100,000 newly minted professionals entering the corporate workforce every single year, all thoroughly trained in, and in the text words, brainwashed by a phony portfolio theory.
Because they all spoke the same Gaussian language, they reinforced each other.
Exactly. No empirical observation, no historic stock market crash could halt the epidemic because the theory had become the only accepted language of business.
But surely the professors had a rationale for this. I mean, they couldn't have all been cynically teaching a lie, right? They had to believe in it.
Their justification was that it was better to teach students a highly structured theory, even if flawed, than to teach them no theory at all.
Wow.
The math made economics look like a hard science. The text quotes an influential economist, Robert C. Merton, who ardently defended this shift.
What was his defense?
Merton claimed that before the advent of portfolio theory, finance was little more than, quote, a collection of anecdotes, rules of thumb, and manipulation of accounting data. He viewed the Gaussian equations as the necessary evolution from superstition to rigorous science.
But the text violently rejects that framing, and it does so by drawing a profound comparison to the history of medicine. I actually found this to be one of the most illuminating parts of the entire source.
It really contextualizes the danger.
The text counters Merton's dismissal of anecdotes by bringing in Claude Bernard, who is widely considered the 19th century father of modern medicine.
It is a devastating comparison. When Claude Bernard was pioneering evidence-based medicine, his philosophy was, facts for now, but with scientific aspirations for later.
Let's explore why that is so important. Think about how medicine actually evolved. For centuries, doctors had grand, elegant, top-down theories about, humors and bloodletting.
Right. The theories were internally consistent.
They made logical sense within their own framework, but they killed people.
Yes.
Evidence-based medicine started when practitioners threw away the grand theories and just started observing what actually worked in the mud and blood of reality. They collected the anecdotes.
They observed the facts, even if they didn't have the biochemical equations to explain why something worked yet.
They prioritized the messy truth of reality over a clean, elegant lie. But the text argues that the economists did the exact opposite.
They desperately wanted the prestige of a grand, clean mathematical theory.
So they built the shiny theory first, using the fake physics of Mediocristan. And when the real-world facts didn't match the theory, they didn't change the theory. They blamed reality for acting like an anomaly.
The text quite literally suggests that economists should be forced to go to medical school just to learn what actual rigorous science looks like.
It's a brutal burn, but it highlights the profound danger of prioritizing academic aesthetics over real-world effectiveness.
And the contagion didn't stop with the MBA programs. It reached a fever pitch in 1997 with yet another round of Nobel Prizes, which really set the stage for an all-out intellectual war.
This centers around the famous Black-Scholes-Merton option pricing formula. In 1997, the Swedish Academy awarded the prize to Myron Scholes and Robert C. Merton, The same Merton who dismissed the past as mere anecdotes.
Right. The prize was awarded for making an old mathematical formula, quote-unquote, usable.
The text points out a massive historical slight here, though. The argument is that Scholes and Merton didn't actually invent the formula from scratch.
They had precursors, practitioners who deeply understood the messy reality of risk. People like the mathematician and gambler Ed Thorpe.
Oh, the guy who wrote Beat the Dealer.
Exactly. He actually used early versions of these formulas to make real money in the markets.
So what did Scholes and Merton actually do to win the prize, then?
According to the text, all they did was strip away the messy, real-world risk premiums. They platonified the formula.
Platonified?
Yes, they made it perfectly compatible with the grand Gaussian equilibrium theories of the academic establishment. They took a gritty practitioner's tool and scrubbed it clean until it fit the fake world of Mediocristan.
And because of this perceived theft, the author of the text felt compelled to act as a representative for the bottom-up practitioners.
The actual traders on the floor.
Right, the ones who understood the wrinkles of risk far better than the academics, but who lacked the dense technical vocabulary to fight back in published journals. This led to what the text describes as a highly entertaining period of crashing finance conferences.
Oh, the imagery in this section is incredibly vivid.
Tell me about it.
You can just picture this lone skeptic sitting in the audience of elite academic conferences, listening to Nobel laureates present these deeply complex, interlocking mathematical models.
And
then, during the Q&A, simply raising a hand and asking foundational questions about the underlying probability assumptions.
questions that entirely short-circuited the speakers.
Yes. The text notes a terrifying cohabitation in these academics, an incredible, almost superhuman level of mathematical skill, combined with an absolute absence of basic, common-sense understanding of risk.
They are described as idiot savants who had fallen entirely for the ludic fallacy.
Because the question struck at the very foundation of their life's work, and because they mathematically couldn't answer them without admitting the foundation was flawed, they resorted to insults.
And the sociology of these insults reveals so much about the divide between these two worlds.
It's fascinating. The text lists the slurs hurled at the critique: obsessive, philosophical, and essayist. But the most revealing insults were contextual.
Like what?
Well, in the academic world, they tried to dismiss the critique by sneeringly calling it the work of a practitioner.
Which is meant to imply you aren't smart enough to grasp the pure theory.
Exactly. But then, when the critique was taken to the business world, the suits tried to dismiss it by calling it academic.
Which implies you don't understand the real world of making money.
Right. The critique was operating in a lonely space between two rigidly defined worlds, threatening both of them.
And the text draws a sharp contrast between the thin skin of these elite, insulated academics and the brutal culture of pit traders.
Oh, this is a great point.
Yeah, if you are trading in the pits of Chicago, someone might lose $1 million on a trade you made, scream in your face until their vocal cords bleed, and then an hour later invite you to their house for a Christmas party.
It's just business.
Right. The environment is chaotic, offensive, and loud, but fundamentally honest because the scoreboard is real money.
The academics, however, were entirely insulated by their tenure and titles. They had no idea how to emotionally handle a direct, logical challenge to their premises.
Which leads to a fantastic, practical takeaway from the text regarding how to handle debate in your own life. The argument is that an ad hominem attack against an intellectual, an attack on the person, not the idea, is actually highly flattering.
It is the ultimate white flag of surrender.
It really is. If a Nobel laureate has to resort to calling you a name, it unequivocally proves they have no intelligent mathematical response to your actual message. You've already won the argument.
But this introduces a very dark psychological reality.
Let's get into that.
When brilliant people are confronted with undeniable evidence that their life's work is flawed, they rarely experience a sudden epiphany, thank you for correcting them, and change their minds.
No, their brains break. They experience severe cognitive dissonance.
The text brings in a psychologist, Philip Tetlock, who actually observed this exact phenomenon firsthand.
Really? He was at the conferences?
Yes. Tetlock attended one of these presentations and noted an acute, palpable state of cognitive tension in the audience.
Wow.
These highly educated finance professionals were mathematically realizing that the core of everything they had been taught was flawed, yet they also knew they were going straight back to their offices to continue practicing it anyway.
The mental gymnastics required to resolve that tension lead to some bizarre behavior. The text describes several specific instances.
Yes, there was a time when Myron Scholes himself got into a state of visible rage.
Over the critique.
Yes, but instead of attacking the actual argument, he attacked a completely deformed straw man version of it. He claimed the critique was arguing that everything in the market was entirely random and unpredictable.
Which isn't the argument at all.
Not at all. The actual argument is that extreme events are largely random and dictate the outcome.
Right. Then there was an incident in Paris involving a prominent member of the French Academy of Science.
Oh, this one is unbelievable.
When presented with undeniable empirical evidence of extreme black swan events in the markets, this man actually blew a fuse. He turned red, started hyperventilating, hurled insults, and shouted, "I am a member of the Academy of Science."
As if his bureaucratic title could somehow alter the laws of probability.
It's the ultimate, desperate appeal to authority when the data fails you.
And then there was Steve Ross, considered a highly formidable economist.
How did he handle it?
Rather than rebutting the core thesis that Gaussian math fails in Extremistan, Ross tried to deflect by nitpicking minor historical approximations in the presentation,
Like what?
arguing over who published what paper first.
It is pure evasion. It is a frantic attempt to protect the structural integrity of the model by ignoring the giant hole in the bottom of the boat.
And the text points out a crucial philosophical crutch that economists rely on to justify this evasion. It stems from an argument made by the famous economist Milton Friedman.
Okay, let's look at Friedman's argument.
Friedman famously argued that economic models do not actually need to have realistic assumptions in order to be acceptable.
Wait, really?
Yes, he said, as long as the model works, the assumptions can be absurd.
That sounds dangerous.
It is. This argument effectively gave an entire generation of economists a philosophical license to produce severely defective, unrealistic mathematical representations of reality.
But the text forcefully rejects this excuse. From this perspective, the Gaussian models fail twice over. They rely on fake, unrealistic assumptions, and they catastrophically fail to produce reliable results in reality.
They aren't realistic, and they aren't predictive. They fail on both ends of the spectrum.
So we have to ask, how does this academic illusion bleed into the everyday lives of the public? The text highlights a critical mental bias about risk that affects everyone.
Yes, let's apply this to the listener directly.
When you hear on the news that an extreme market crash or a catastrophic flood is a 1 in 20 years event, how do you interpret that? The text argues that most people mistakenly believe that if they only invest or live in that flood zone for 10 years, they are entirely safe.
It is a fundamental, dangerous misunderstanding of probability and time.
Because it's not a schedule.
Exactly. A 1 in 20 years event does not operate on a cosmic timetable. It isn't waiting patiently in line for year 20 to roll around. It could happen tomorrow.
And more terrifyingly, it could happen tomorrow and then happen again next week.
Yes.
Yeah.
But these models convince the public that they have a predictable timetable of safety.
But that illusion of safety was violently shattered in 1998 in an event that proved all these warnings right on a catastrophic global scale. The theoretical debates at academic conferences suddenly became a massive financial crisis.
We're talking about the infamous blow-up of long-term capital management, or LTCM.
This is the ultimate undeniable case study. This is where theory and reality collide at 100 miles an hour.
LTCM was a massive speculative trading firm, a hedge fund.
And who were the founding partners? None other than Robert Merton Jr. and Myron Scholes.
The very men who had just won the Nobel Prize the year prior for their mathematical risk models.
LTCM was hailed as the ultimate genius fund. They had the absolute top-tier resumes, the highest ranks of academia on their board, and they used the pristine ideas of portfolio theory to perfectly manage their risk.
But as the text notes, all they really did was manage to enlarge the ludic fallacy to industrial proportions.
They took the neatly bounded math of the casino and applied it to the wild, contagious economy of the globe. Explain exactly how that caused the blow-up.
It comes down to leverage. Because their Gaussian models told them with mathematical certainty that certain extreme market movements were impossible, the fund managers felt incredibly safe.
And when you feel perfectly safe,
When you feel perfectly safe, you borrow money to amplify your bets. They took on a truly monstrous amount of leverage, borrowing billions upon billions of dollars, confident that their models had insulated them from disaster.
But then, Extremistan asserted itself.
Yes. In the summer of 1998, a Russian financial crisis occurred. Russia defaulted on its debt.
Which triggered a massive, contagious chain reaction across global markets.
This was a quintessential black swan event. It was a massive, unpredicted shock that lay completely outside the neat boundaries of their elegant mathematical models.
The snowflakes didn't just fall, the whole mountain came down.
Because they had leveraged themselves to the hilt based on the assumption that such a deviation was impossible, LTCM didn't just lose money. They went spectacularly bust in a matter of weeks.
And because they owed so much money to so many different banks, their collapse nearly took down the entire global financial system with them.
The Federal Reserve literally had to step in and orchestrate a bailout to prevent a global depression.
The ideas of Merton, Scholes, and modern portfolio theory were publicly, undeniably failing in real time. The magnitude of the failure was so profound that it should have been the death knell for Gaussian finance.
The text notes that many people fully expected these portfolio theorists to suffer the fate of the big tobacco companies, to be dragged into congressional hearings and held accountable for actively endangering the public savings with their reckless methods.
It should have been a reckoning, a complete paradigm shift.
But reading the aftermath in the text is just astounding.
What were the actual consequences for the academics who nearly crashed the global economy with flawed math?
Absolutely none.
Nothing.
The text states flatly, none of that happened.
Unbelievable.
The MBA programs in business schools didn't pause. They went right on teaching portfolio theory to the next generation of students the following semester, as if nothing had occurred.
And the option pricing formula.
It went right on being called the Black School's Merton formula. It wasn't reverted to the names of the practitioners who actually understood the messiness of risk, like Ed Thorpe or Louis Bachelier.
The academic prestige, the tenure, the textbook deals, they all remained entirely intact despite the catastrophic real-world failure.
This maddening phenomenon is what brings the critique to the titular concept of the chapter, Locke's Madman.
We have to ask, how can undisputed geniuses, armed with supercomputers and Nobel Prizes, blow up the financial system?
They do it by playing a game that doesn't actually exist in reality.
The text references the philosopher John Locke. Locke made a brilliant distinction. He defined a madman not as someone who has lost the ability to reason, but as someone who is reasoning correctly from erroneous premises.
It is a profound, subtle distinction. The methodology of Merton and the neoclassical economists involves starting with rigidly Platonic, entirely unrealistic assumptions.
They assume markets follow a Gaussian bell curve.
They constantly invoke the concept of equilibrium.
And from those fake Extremistan ignoring premises, they generate incredibly complex theorems and proofs.
And the math itself is flawless. The text openly admits that their elegant mathematics is perfectly right.
The theorems all interlock beautifully, building a grand, closed, logical system of how the world consumes, saves, and projects the future.
But this raises the ultimate question of the text. What good is perfect math if it's describing a fake world?
As the text notes, to make the messy, chaotic real world fit into perfect mathematics, you have to cheat somewhere. You have to fudge your underlying assumptions.
The analogy the text uses is playing a game of Monopoly.
Oh, I love the Monopoly analogy.
The rules of Monopoly are perfectly closed, airtight, and elegant. If you land on boardwalk with a hotel, the math of what you owe is indisputable.
You can become a grandmaster of Monopoly strategy.
But those rules and that mastery mean absolutely nothing the second you step outside your living room and try to negotiate a real estate deal.
The critique argues that these economists are master Monopoly players trying to manage the real-world economy.
And the text draws a sharp, very specific contrast here. It contrasts these delusional formal thinkers economists like Samuelson, Hicks, Arrow, and Debreu, who the text accuses of wrecking Keynes' original focus on navigating true uncertainty.
Right.
It contrasts them with military and security personnel.
That's a fascinating pivot. Why hold up military people as the ideal counterexample?
Because military planners cannot afford to care about perfect logical reasoning based on fake premises. They operate in a world of immediate physical consequence.
They demand what the text calls realistic ecological assumptions.
Exactly. If an economist model fails, they lose some money, write another white paper explaining why the market acted irrationally, and maybe win another award.
If a military planner's model fails, people die, and battles are lost.
It is the difference between a failed academic science desperately looking for certainties to publish and a sophisticated, grounded craft focused entirely on survival.
Which leads us to the ultimate question for the listener. If the elite, top-down models are not only useless but actively dangerous, how are we supposed to navigate a world full of random, extreme events?
The text lays out a direct philosophical comparison to answer this. It is presented as Table 4, two ways to approach randomness.
It serves as a survival guide for Extremistan. It contrasts the Platonic approach with what it calls skeptical empiricism.
The text gives these two approaches distinct personas to make it clear.
The Platonic approach is represented by a character named Dr. John, and the skeptical empiricist is represented by Fat Tony. Let's break down Dr. John first.
Dr. John represents the academic establishment, the guys with the Nobel Prizes.
He works top-down.
He wears dark suits and crisp white shirts. He relies on published scientific papers, going from books to practice. He is obsessed with fitting every messy detail of reality into a grand, general socioeconomic model.
And his fatal flaw, the mechanism of his downfall.
His fatal flaw is that he assumes the world is Mediocristan. He seeks to be precisely right within a narrow mathematical model.
But because his foundational assumptions are wrong, he ends up being precisely wrong when the real world asserts itself.
Okay, now let's look at Fat Tony, the skeptical empiricist.
Fat Tony works bottom up. He doesn't start with a grand theory.
He develops his intuition from actual practice, from getting his hands dirty in the mud of reality, and he only goes from observations to books much later.
He relies on messy mathematics and robust computational methods, not pristine, fragile physics equations.
He assumes Extremistan is the starting point.
Yeah.
He assumes the black swan is always circling.
He resents the disease of theorizing. He deeply respects people who have the intellectual courage to simply say, I don't know.
And his ultimate goal isn't to be mathematically perfect on a whiteboard. It is to be broadly right across a wide range of messy, unpredictable possibilities.
He wants to survive the avalanche, not win a debate about the snowflakes.
This culminates in the ultimate takeaway the text presents regarding theory itself. The argument is that theory is like medicine, or like government.
It is often useless, sometimes necessary, always self-serving, and occasionally highly lethal.
It requires, as the text brilliantly puts it, close adult supervision. You cannot just turn a complex mathematical equation loose in the world, plug in your life savings, and blindly trust the output.
You have to care vastly more about the underlying premises than the elegant math built on top of them.
You have to stay light on your feet, remain highly adaptable, and systematically reduce your reliance on top-down certainty.
And this brings everything right back to you, the listener. The key to navigating the complex, highly contagious, unpredictable world we live in isn't about finding a better, more complex mathematical equation.
It isn't about waiting for Dr. John to invent a new bell curve that somehow fixes the old one.
It's about recognizing that you might be living in Extremistan while actively trying to use a map drawn for Mediocristan.
It is about avoiding the trap of Locke's Madmen. You must rigorously, constantly question the underlying assumptions of any system, advisor, or software that offers you precise, comforting numbers about the future.
You have to prefer the messy, robust, bottom-up reality of the practitioner over the clean, dangerous, fragile illusion of the top-down theorist.
Because the danger isn't just contained in Wall Street trading firms. The ludic fallacy, the deeply flawed assumption that real life operates by the neat, predictable, independent rules of a casino game, seeps into almost every corner of our modern society.
It dictates our supply chains, our insurance policies, and our national risk management.
It really does.
And so, we want to leave you with a final thought, something to mull over long after this deep dive ends. If the global financial system, a system managed by undisputed geniuses, armed with supercomputers and validated by Nobel Prizes, is actually built on the fragile monopoly board illusion of Mediocristan.
What other vital institutions in your daily life are operating with that exact same illusion of precise mathematical safety?
And more importantly, are you ready for when their bell curve finally breaks?